Thank you very much for coming to Melahuset to launch your book. It's an honor for us to have you here. And I will start right away by saying that it's an amazing book. It's a beautiful collection of selected poems, which somehow reflects your personality. And for people who don't know you, it can be a discovery. For people who know you, it's an affirmation. So could you please say a little word about yourself for people who don't know you?
Thank you, Ari, and thank you to you as well for inviting me here. It means a lot. And that says something about my identity, I think, because it's during Pride. I'm almost cracking up a little bit. It's emotional. It's during Pride. Pride means a lot to me. And, you know, I am gay. I identify as queer. And I'm not just gay. I'm also, you know, of at least dual heritage, with an Indian origin mother, a sort of dubious connection to India, and a Norwegian father. So doing it at Melahuset during Pride is perfect, I feel. With Mela having this focus on minority cultures, immigration, cosmopolitanism, etc. What else? So this book was published in India, which I'm really happy about. It shows clearly, I guess, my identity as both Indian and Norwegian. So some Norwegian people may not understand everything, all the references, the Indian references. Some Indian people may not understand all the Norwegian references immediately, but I still think it's like, yeah, you don't need to understand everything. And it's also clearly queer. And I think of myself as queer not just in terms of my sexual practice. It's also a way of looking at the world and a way of looking at the status quo and the norms. So it's queer in its relationship to nature. It's queer in its relationship to other people, to animals. Yeah. And I'm also a deeply spiritual person. So that is also reflected, I guess, in the book.
Yeah, exactly. That's the point I want to come, because normally the natural reaction towards religions who are suppressing homosexuality is to reject any type of religions or beliefs. But you, in some way, you embracing or reconciliate your homosexuality with religions. That's something very interesting. Can you say something about that?
Yeah, that is, I mean, people are different. So, you know, I'm not trying to be a missionary to say that, you know, all queer gay people should be religious, nor that all religious people should be queer. But, you know, it happens that I am both gay and spiritual, and I would say religious, because I appreciate the institution of religion, which has carried with it, you know, literature, rituals, practices like meditation, all of these things. I'm not just an individual, so I'm not just spiritual. I'm also deeply religious. And part of my project has been to, you know, find these places in religions and mythologies where there is something queer, clearly queer. So, you know, in Indian mythology, there is Krishna who becomes Mohini. There's this fluidity of gender, playfulness of sexuality. You know, even in Norse mythology, we have this idea of Thor with the hammer, and he does a bit of drag at some point in one myth. So I play with this in some of my poetry. And I think, you know, within all institutions, not just religion, but within all institutions, you have different tendencies and different movements and friction. So you will have conservative and repressive, but you will also have more progressive and liberal. And I think the danger sometimes maybe is that we give up religion to the conservatives. They define us out. They say, oh, you are not a good Hindu, not a good Christian, not a good Muslim. And then suddenly we're not Muslim, Hindu, Christian because we are reacting to this. But actually, the religions are very complex. So I insist, you know, I'm a very good Hindu. I'm a practicing Hindu.
Well, that you say that in your...
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So,
but you also talk about a lot about Jesus.
Yes, I love Jesus.
Yeah, you love Jesus.
I love Jesus,
yeah.
And Jesus loves me. And, you know, Yeah.
There's not only the Hindu part, also the
No,
Christian
yes,
part.
yeah.
You also talk about halal.
Yeah, like if I can quote Gandhi, are you a Hindu? He asks, and he says, yes, and a Christian, and a Muslim, and a Jew, and a Parsi. You know.
So that's your Guju
That's
connection.
my
with
Guju.
Gandhi.
Yeah.
Guju connection with Gandhi.
yeah.
So that's your Guju connection with
Yeah,
Gandhi.
some good stuff coming from. yeah.
So I will go straight to what Michel Foucault says, that in society that made use of ars erotica, secrecy served the purpose of amplifying the truth that is drawn from pleasure, for the need to hold in the greatest reserve. And as you know, in the many passages of Masnavi tradition, the great epic of 13th century Persian mystic Rumi, mystical knowledge is communicated in erotic terms. And your poetry is exactly the same thing. So is that something intended, or is that something natural?
Yeah, I think for me, the erotic is interesting in many ways. It's interesting as pure, pleasure, and I think it's still important as a literary, but also a political project in queer literature that we talk about anal sex, basically. That we talk about sex, which is because that is what has made us dirty, sinful, wrong. Two men in a suit having a child, getting married. Of course, we win the battle with that, But the movement has been so asexualized, or trying to get rid of all dirty parts of us. I also want to bring in these parts of us that are not, in my view, dirty. Because it's also giving space to and saying, this is something beautiful, So that is one part of it. And then the spiritual part of it is, for me, connecting to another person, also in an erotic way, can be deeply spiritual. It's not always, but it can be deeply spiritual, I think. And I can also use the erotic and kind of the imagery as I wouldn't say symbol only, because it's not, I don't want to remove it from the hard reality,
No.
But it's both actually flesh and blood and things going on, pulsing, and the spirituality is in there, It's also, this is also about the divine and the sacred. It says something about the divine and the sacred. Yeah. So I don't use the erotic as an image for something else. To me, the divine and the sacred is immanent. There is no. It's more tantric. Like tantra is the kind of, I guess, the tendency within Hinduism I most appreciate, because it says, this flesh, this piece of shit, on the street is God.
Yeah, because that's in your poem Life, which I mostly loved it. Because the depth, the philosophical thought behind that poem is very, very beautiful. But you start with a very, I don't like to use the word vulgar, but words we don't use in literature. So talking about shitting and anus and all type of things. So even if it starts in a so-called vulgar way, it ends beautifully to define what life is. So I think the what do you call, the way you write, it's also very, I can say sometimes hypersexual, which in my sense, because I'm not used to queer literature. So me as a normal person, when I read it, I thought it's hypersexual. But in your way, it's a political statement. Am I right?
Yeah, it's partly, I'm not the kind of person who says, all politics should not be part of literature. I think everything is political. So it is partly a political project, because I think, as I said, gay sex is the problem. If you look at India, the criminalization in India that was introduced by the British, it's not about two men wearing a suit having a baby, or two women. It's about the sex. It's carnal intercourse against the order of nature. So let's look at carnal intercourse. And I don't think it's against the order of nature, because nature is, spectacular.
Absolutely.
So that is, I guess, part of a political project for me. And I think it's not just an Indian project, it's also very much in Norway. We have a lot of acceptance here, but I still hesitate when I say anal sex when I'm sitting on the stage here, And the reason it's important is because this is why we were criminalized. This is why we were looked at as sinful. This is why we are looked at as dirty. You know, all of these things. The rest of us is just nice. It's like straight people, you know, wearing clothes and whatnot. It's the sexual thing that's making us different. Yeah.
But it's interesting what you're saying that in a country like modern society like Norway, you still feel little awkward to say sex. And I always thought, we had some discussion before, I always thought that I'm carrying the burden of twice colonized. But you, in your own way, you are twice marginalized here. You are Indian and gay. How do you cope with that?
Yeah. I think that's an interesting question, the idea of like being a double minority or triple or whatever. Because it's not like a simple, you know, I carry the double burden of oppression. Because sometimes I don't do this like consciously, I think. But, you know, sometimes it helps a lot if the immigration people notice or think that I'm gay. Then I'm like, oh, he's not a terrorist, you know. You know? Like, he's not a terrorist. So if I just like move my hips a little bit, you know, walking through Heathrow or wherever, then yeah, I don't get stopped. So it has its its challenges and its possibilities, you know, like being double minority. I can play on both. It's yeah, it's not like I feel doubly marginalized, doubly everything, and it varies according to context, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And one more question I will ask you. Your poetry has many languages. I mean, you write in English. There are Spanish words, French words also, I think. A lot of Desi words, and but no Norwegian words, if I'm not mistaken.
That's interesting.
I don't think so.
Yeah.
There's no one Norwegian word.
Oh no.
No.
Oh.
See.
No, but well, there's some. I think in the English language there is a lot of like originally Nordic, like, you know. So it comes in that way.
That's not the way it works. That's not the way it works. So there are all type of language, but not Norwegian.
Oh damn.
So yeah.
Oh no.
So you didn't know that.
Oh, I didn't know that. No, I didn't think about it. No, that's okay. Next one, more Norwegian words. No, I don't know. But it is the way I speak English. It's not so much, I guess, the Norwegian words coming in when I speak English. Maybe sometimes yes, it does, but not so much because the English that I was brought up with was with my mother's family. You know.
Exactly.
So then it's more like the Gujarati words, Hindi words, or Desi words mixed in. Also sometimes Swahili words, making it all very complicated. Yeah. Yeah. So, and I think for me, I think we've had this discussion before, Ari, because for me it's also, it was interesting because when my editor, and this is in India, when the editor looked through and was doing like, you know, what they do, editing and commenting, she changed all the Desi words, all the words that weren't like, you know, Queen's English, she changed into italicized like words.
Okay.
And italicizing something is a way of saying this is different. This stands out. This is different. And I said to her, no, this is not different. This is my language. It's all part of the way I speak English. This is not the Queen's English, you know? And that's also, I guess, a project which is, you know, also partly, I guess, post-colonial, to say, look, the English that we are writing and talking and all of that now is not the English of the,
Absolutely. So I will finish by saying that this book is really amazing, and I'll really recommend to all of you in this place to buy it and to give an applause to my friend Vikram. Thank you.